talk to you, or whether you could leave it on. I'm going to keep mine on. If you were here, then you would know what these dates are here. These dates are dates that I've done presentations in this very room. The first day, February 23rd, 2022, presumably the computers here, they were down. But these other 2 days, while the computers were on, I was able to do some research, and then I did presentations here. Why? Because on this day, February 23rd, 2022, my intention was to come to the library and to compile information I'd already written, including in these notebooks I have over here, to pre-present the case as evidence had been made available in my manner, including the case I had originally attempted to present before the Northern District of Texas U.S. District Court here in Dallas. Computers were down. There was ice storm, transportation was down, there's somewhere else you could go. So instead I presented it formally, verbally, like this. It was two-hour sessions, one before lunch, one after lunch. I did not know what was going on at that point in time in Russia. I had very sporadic information about what was going on in Ukraine. On May 11th and May 13th, after doing some research and following up on patterns that had already been ongoing and in regards to charges that I'd already attempted to have addressed, I demanded actions. And had those actions been implemented, then I contend that the mission would have been successful. I gave presentations in here at least 45 minutes to 2 hours. This one I think was 45 minutes. This one was 2 hours long. Or actually, this one was 2 hours. This one was 45 minutes long. Regarding the justifications as well as the tactical and strategic goals associated with them. Please remember how we discussed and articulated the concept of refinery in this context and what that meant. Not only that, I contend that there are already in the federal budget for the United States appropriations that would have been available to execute these. And additionally, here within the state of Texas, based on the work I alone have done as interim attorney general or as attorney general, the processes would have already been put into place to effectuate that. Indeed, on those time frames where those actions could have been taken, other actions were taken instead. That I contend was an act of fraud because there was another priority for which those specific resources should already have been allocated. So I stand behind this and understand it now we're 7 days later. May 18th, the evening of May 18th, before 9:30 p.m., I was walking downtown. I have a routine I have, and I pretty much keep it consistent throughout the day. I found a $100 bill in the streets. Since I've been in Dallas at least 2 times prior to that, before I was given the indoor living arrangement I had for a while, I found $100 bills on the street. And, I found people on the street. They gave me a $100 bill. So I was the $100 bill they found on the street. And in the course of that, I kept detailed records of all of the purchases I made, just as I did with this one. And I was able to track how some of the things that I purchased during that temporary period of time where I had cash actually came up later. And my contention was these people offered those $100 bills as part of some sort of bidding process they had. How exactly they know what you do with cash, there's a variety of ways you can actually track it. That's what I've actually been able to do. Unfortunately, the records concerning the prior times have been stolen, but I have the ones most recently. I acquired it around before 9 p.m. on May 18th. I have about 11 cents left. I intentionally spent the entire $100 in one day, except for $1 that I used this morning, as I do every day. I have $1 and I go to the same place. I purchase the same thing every morning, for a reason. Why is this important? Well, because if you look at what I've been doing as I've been on the streets, I've been keeping track of things that have been going on concurrently to what is supposed to be the process associated with a case that I contend was not only an unlawful proceeding, but was an effort to try to abuse the judicial system in order to commit high crimes. And I've already detailed this many times. I've submitted many motions to the court. I contend I have been received in absolute bad faith, and instead what the court has done has used my efforts as some sort of loan or as some sort of derivative proceeding, including in manners that are outside of their jurisdiction, whereas the charges in the actual case are indeed in their jurisdiction, and also in manners that compromise national security. National security. What does national security mean? Well, let's go through what we have here. Just going to go through briefly. On the 5th of May 2022, I was reviewing a book on national security law that discussed specifically the concept of the 60-day clock and how that applies whenever the President of the United States authorizes the forces of the United States Armed Forces to be sent somewhere and prior to congressional authorization. There's a 60-day period of time where the President can employ before Congress needs to approve it, before there are specific implications. After reading this information, I became concerned specifically in regards to events that occurred around the alleged January 6th insurrection or Capitol riot, or the assertion of constitutional authority after an unconstitutional application of the constitutional authority at the time. And in that manner, also how that has to do with a case called Trump versus New York, which you may know of. It's a case the Supreme Court ended up considering specific to matters related to the United States Census. In both that opinion, as well as by law, as it refers to, in that opinion, Donald Trump was required to present a closeout report by the end of December 31st, 2020, concerning the results of the United States Census. I have done all the research I can. I contend he personally has not actually done that job. Now, during the Biden administration, there are other implications. But the point of the matter is, it was more than 60 days between the time when he was required by law to present that report, and it didn't happen. And within 6 days, there was what was identified as the Capitol riot. But more than that, what there also was a deployment of National Guard forces to Washington, D.C., presumably as a response to the Capitol riot. And according to publicly accessible information that has been available at least within the last 10 days, as well as following up on timelines stated previously, going back through 2020, those National Guardsmen were on site in Washington, D.C. for more than 60 days. By the time they ended up leaving Washington, D.C., certain states had made a determination that they were going to leave, and other states had made determinations they were going to leave at another time. I contend this is absolutely 100% strategic, and both Biden and Trump, as well as I believe Barack Obama, as well as I believe former presidential candidate Hillary Clinton, and other former presidential candidates, including those that are materially concerned here, knew. And I contend all the governors of every state knew, and they pretend like we don't. This is also relevant because of elements of the 2009 appropriations bill specific to the Department of Defense. In April of 2020, I attempted to contact members of the Senate Armed Forces Committee, the Senate Appropriations Committee, as well as the House Armed Forces Committee, and the House Appropriations Committee. In the 2009 appropriations bill, there is a specific process whereby one contacts those committees in order to engage around specific appropriations related to chemical, biological, radiological, or nuclear weapons. Specifically, chemical and biological weapons disposal, as was identified in the 2009 appropriations bill, but also around interdiction efforts around border traffic concerning narcotics. So counter-narcotics interdiction efforts that require cooperation between the Department of Justice and the Department of Defense. Within that appropriations bill, there was a 15-day timeline, and then after the 15-day timeline, there was another 45-day timeline. In the course of that, I got no response. As a matter of fact, what it appeared was somebody intercepted my messages and used them for local bidding, including very illegal processes in the connection with those local bids. But that 15-day timeline and the later 45-day timeline were actually met, but not by the United States. Now, in the congressional budget cycles, 6-year terms and 11-year terms have a very important factor involved in them. By 2020, these appropriations for 2009 should have already been on hand and available. It also brings up another matter related to the 2019 budget appropriations process concerning what were identified, at least as of July 2019, in the Appropriations Committee processes regarding the 2020 budget, information regarding patch kits. Those patch kits, or information about patch kits, was available, if nothing else, in the 2020 budget recommendation presented by the White House for the Department of Defense. There were at least 3 indications of what they were, along with a lot of other information. That report from the President, or from the White House, that was sent to the Congress, was dated for March 15th of 2019. What happened on March 16th of 2020? As many of us know, on March 16th of 2020, numerous governors around the country, including the state of Texas, declared a state of emergency in response to COVID-19. That would be a year and a day later. But what happened in November of 2019? By November 2019, the Congress had approved, and the President signed into law, an emergency appropriations bill that pretty much de-emphasized appropriations processes outside of appropriations for the Department of Homeland Security and the Department for Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Those emergency appropriations were to expire on March 15th of 2020. That's the day before the announcements from the governor, but a year to the day after the White House submitted its budget proposal around Department of Defense appropriations. The point of the matter is, in 2020, April 2020, the United States should have already been prepared to address matters that were already in the appropriations bill specific to the narcotics efforts and also specific to CBR, and they did not respond at all. Those responses were provided by other countries, including countries that are currently sanctioned by the United States or are otherwise designated as enemies in some manner, way, shape, or form. Now, I just want to disclose that 2009 appropriations bill was the exact bill I was researching as part of a 2008 congressional campaign in Chicago. I contend that what was found at that time was very provocative and is directly connected to the situation I'm in now. But nonetheless, regardless, as of the bill that was signed into law that went into effect with the appropriations for 2009, those appropriations should have been available in 2020. They weren't, not in the United States. 13th March is important for a number of reasons. What happened on March 13th of 2010? Exactly 12 years before this. As of today, March 13th of 2022, is Terran 2, the current head of state of Chechnya. But on March 13th of 2010, there were 2 attacks identified in Mexico, impacting staff at the American consulate. It's also a very important day for the Supreme Court of the United States. April 22nd, 2022, I was doing research on securities and treaty research. I had that research right here. It's harrowing what I found. I was specifically looking at treaties regarding the Ukraine. This is in the Treaties in Force, which is a book of the current treaties that's produced by the Department of State. They are by law required to publish this book on an annual basis. However, for some reason, the years 2013 and 2014, there are no book editions. There are for 2015 on. I had previously, in 2008, done a research in Austin using treaties in force concerning matters related to a number of countries, including military appropriations connected to defense spending, specifically associated with certain military maritime vessels. But at the time, what I also found was that when it came to the Palestinian Authority and the Palestine Liberation Organization, for several years, going back before 2000, going back to 2012, going to 2012, the Palestinian Authority and the Palestine Liberation Organization had a very specific manner which referred to 8 different financial agreements, or rather what were identified as financing agreements, comparable to a loan for the Palestine Liberation Organization. The first one, or one of the major ones, was for September 12th, which was a year short of 10 years before September 11th. And the other one was one for USAID domestic assistance or foreign assistance, humanitarian assistance to the Palestinian Authority. These are the only formal treaties identified in treaties in force regarding the Palestinian Authority, Palestine, or the Palestine Liberation Organization. What does that mean? Now, the thing is, there's 2 different contexts of this. Right? So we're going to get back to how is that related to the Netherlands and Iran. Under treaties for Iran, during the time frame during which the negotiations for the hostages that were held by Iran was conducted, it was performed in Amsterdam. So the actual treaty for the release of the Iranian hostages was performed in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands. This brings up the information that I found regarding the Ukraine. I did research there, and one of the things I found, several of the dates concerning the treaties currently in effect, that have been effective at least for the last 15 years regarding the Ukraine, mention or reference dates that occur within a very specific element of the specific pattern of racketeering that I have been trying to confront and have prosecuted since 2017. Specifically, on May 15th, there is a treaty that goes into effect, the anniversary of a treaty that goes into effect for Afghanistan, or what is called Afghanistan settlement, that was negotiated in Kiev. So in this regard, Kiev became the locus of whatever it was that was negotiated in terms of the settlement of matters related to Afghanistan in 1988 between the United States and the Soviet Union. There's another treaty that also discusses empowering, or rather authorizing, the Ukraine to be in succession to treaties the United States had with the USSR. There are a number of treaties, including between 2013 and 2015, what are identified as loan guarantees between the United States and Ukraine that I consider unprecedented. I haven't seen anything like that for any other country in all of my treaty research, but there's 4 of them. And the dates on which these treaties occurred are absolutely pinpoint precise, not only in terms of how I personally have been impacted, but how the specific pattern I've been trying to track and have prosecutors impacted. It's also worthy to know May 16th. May 16th, which is the day after my birthday, and a date of concern in my specific matter recently about why I'm on the street, has to do with rents for embassies in Moscow. However, these rents for embassies in Moscow are located, at least in terms of the brokering of the treaty for them, in the Ukraine, in Kiev. So there was a treaty between the United States, the former Soviet Union, regarding the rents associated with American embassies in Moscow, American embassies in the USSR, that was brokered in Kiev. The date of that treaty was May 16th. Just so you know, presumably the rent is free, right? There's other things as well, but this treaty research is absolutely important. It was on April 22nd of 2022 that I performed it. I performed it someplace that, by the way, I'm supposedly not allowed to access, even though originally, prior to COVID-19, it was open to the public. 21st of February 2022, I also was following up on information regarding a 1974 conference here in the United States, I believe it was in Kentucky, regarding developments in the USSR. That was the 3rd year that they had this conference. That year they were focusing on the Ukrainian SSR, whereas previously they've been focusing on Russia. It was understood from the introduction to this book, which I was not able to obtain. The book is no longer available. It's disappeared. By the way, it's disappeared with every other book on the Ukraine. But in the course of doing that, it's understood nobody from the Ukrainian SSR came to the conference. Anytime they invited, everybody they invited refused to attend. But there was a conference including with people who were of Ukrainian descent, people that were interested in matters related to the USSR, especially Ukraine. And one of the elements of this conference had to do with the nascent cybernetics sector of the USSR. Specifically, it was a journal in the USSR called Cybernetica, and it has a list of a number of authors and the articles they were working on. In the course of this conference information, it was disclosed that in the 1970s, 3 corporations based in the United States had contracted with the Soviet Union to provide them with high-powered computers in order to use for their cybernetic sector. Among those corporations were Rand Corporation, another corporation whose initials, by the way, are CDC, and as I understand does not itself exist anymore, and the 3rd corporation was Monsanto. So Monsanto and Rand and another corporation were on the record as having contracted with the Soviet Union to help them acquire high-power computer technology to use for their nascent cybernetics program. I can say that that's absolutely relevant. By the way, the first time I encountered that article was on February 6th of 2022. If you remember, here in Dallas there was an ice storm, and most things were closed down. There were very few places open. It just so happened the location I found that was open that day. It's also the day, by the way, I had my evidence stolen from my thumb drive closed trying to review it. Then we go into the next section, which has to do with things that actually predate some of this information. This is actually 22, not 21. Oh, no, that's sorry, 22 there. In 2021, this is what I meant. November 21st, 2021, I was doing research as a follow-up, actually, of things I had done previously. The research I was doing was in a book that was discussing trials regarding war crimes, and specifically it was talking about a case regarding the Israeli Committee Against Torture that was contesting policies that were in effect by the nation of Israel. I actually was an author of an article, or co-author of an article, that focused on elements of that trial and how they impacted the trial that happened in the United States. It discusses the Israel Basic Law 1992, and it happens that the day I encountered this was November 21st. But in the course of these timelines associated with what I'm dealing with now, my eviction occurred on September 21st of 2021. By Texas law, if one is seeking recovery or is seeking some sort of compensation in the course of trying to enforce some sort of property claim, they're supposed to declare whether or not they expect it within 30 days, 60 days, or 90 days. Despite me petitioning the court and requesting the courts to compel them to disclose what time frame they were working on, the courts denied the motion, and denied the the capacity for me to get that clarification in connection with other things about the proceeding that were illegal. So I was keeping track of it at 30, 60, and 90. By November 21st, it would have been the 30th, would have been the 60th day. The 60 days means something in connection with mortgages and foreclosure processes. And so by that time, my understanding is concurrently something was trying to locate itself within the Israeli-Palestinian area. The 20th of December of 2021, which would have been the day before the 21st, but also would have been 90 days. I was looking through books at the time. At that time, at this time frame in October, I had come into $10. The transfer title is $10. I came into a $10 bill on the day of the deadline each time. As a matter of fact, it's happened 5 times. Before this, it's happened 5 times. And every time, the court was supposed to contact me, or there was a deadline regarding the court, including in connection with me filing and requesting the court respond. No response. But every single time, on time, that day, before 4 p.m., somebody gave me a $10 bill. Twice, unsolicited. Right? Was I working a tax at the time? Yes, I was. Do I have a certain way of engaging and acting in public space when they're waving off a really horrible tax on me? Yes, I do. But apparently, whatever was going on with that tax they were waving on to me, somebody else felt compelled to give me a $10 bill. So, by the 20th of December, I was looking here, and I didn't have that time right then, I didn't have the cash, so I did an inventory of certain books, and one of the things I found was this. Give me a second. It is a book, a biography, about the life of Roy Cohn. And one of the things it says in this biography is that in Roy Cohn's life, he didn't run for office, he didn't have a corporation, he didn't build a building himself, and he personally was never directly involved in organized crime. But he was able to obtain the kind of position he did. And in obtaining the kind of position he did, he was able to be successful except for what? What's this say? Yet he never held elective office, never ran a political party, never controlled a crime family, never built a building, never even owned one. A cascade of dollars went through his hands, and yet he died broke. All he had was himself. That was on 20th December 2021 at 8:55 p.m. I contend this is the aim. And the second time the aim was attempted because of what happened on November 1st of 2021. I have found evidence that concurrent to my process. Prior to November 1st of 2021, 3 federal district judges within the United States ended up dying. And within 72 hours of the announcement of their death, there was a notice about somebody else declaring their intent to run for a judgeship. Different demographics, different areas. But all 3 of those federal district judges that died on deadlines in my case. What does that mean? I'm going to get into that in a more formal process. There's actually a motion that I've already compiled. I have not yet submitted it. I have a number of motions I haven't submitted yet because there's no actual verifiable process to do so. But this is what would happen after the 90th day, right? Now we're at May 18, and on May 18, I find a $100 bill on the street. Was it a coincidence? No, it wasn't a coincidence. They know my routine. Would I make it in time? I don't know. Did I make it in time? I'm not dead, right? But then we got to deal with these things here, which is 13th of March of 2022. I wrote a statement that was my analysis of events that were ongoing, including in connection with how what's going on here in Dallas, as well as other parts of the United States, is directly connected to what's being brought in the news regarding the situation in Ukraine. It just so happens this year is exactly the 20th year after I first went to Palestine and was reporting on issues in Palestine. I went there with one intent, but when I got there, there were incursions ongoing, and as a result, I ended up engaging in the manners that I did. Prior to that, I had spent a month in Honduras. So I went to Honduras for a month, and then I went to Palestine for 2.5 to 3 months. We are now in the 20th anniversary of those time frames. Under Texas law, but also under federal law, one can acquire a judgment lien for up to 20 years. And after the first 20 years, they can determine whether or not to renew the lien for another 20 years. Now, back in the 80s, when you had a 40-year mortgage, that means one thing. My understanding of 40-year mortgages these days, well, they're not as frequent. But prior to 2020, 3 audits from the Office of the Comptroller of Currency that were coming up on their 40th anniversary. I also found another one after that. I actually did follow-up reports on all of those audits, including the audit that would have had a major benchmark, its 40th anniversary, on February 4th of 2021. What happened on February 3rd of 2021? Again, I'll get into that in another form. I've already talked about that elsewhere. But the point of the matter is, 3 times I did formal follow-ups to the Office of the Comptroller of Currency audits at the 40th anniversary. My understanding is somebody had a 40-year deal connected to. They pegged a 40-year security to those audits. And where was the information about it? There was nothing I could find publicly that spoke directly to the information of those audits. One of those audits was commissioned by a senator who was also an astronaut, or rather demanded as part of his committee duties to be performed. What more authority do you need to actually follow through on a 40-year obligation if it's not that? But at the time, there was no information publicly available. That report, by the way, that audit, had to do with calls that were ongoing in consideration of the Department of Energy's management of its uranium enrichment facilities. I just want to ask, who blows that deal? Who thinks they're entitled to abuse office and or manipulate policy or to engage in actions with the justification that somehow they're involved with securing systems or processes associated with uranium enrichment, and then they let it default? And this is what I've been watching for 3 years. Intentional defaults on important anniversaries connected to nuclear security, not just in the United States, but also in the other areas that are of concern. Twice this year, actions that could have been taken in the United States in correlation with ongoing processes could have been engaged in order to secure the nuclear sector, specifically in regards to Chernobyl, and specifically in regards to Chernobyl via the Ukraine. Both times they were sabotaged. Both times they were sabotaged, including in connection with a 72-hour period wherein there was an announcement that Russia had a missile attack on the Chernobyl nuclear power facility. It didn't need to happen. Whatever it was that justified that specific attack by Russia should already have been taken care of. It was intentionally not taken care of. I could have taken care of it, at least in conjunction with other people that had the available resources and knew what was going on. But somebody has decided that all of this is supposed to be for something else. What is that? Well, see, here's the scene, right? Right now they're tearing this to the head state in Chechnya. As of this morning, they've been doing this for a while. I've tried to stay away from Chechnya, just so you know. Why? Because of information about the movement of the mothers and the movement of the disappeared from the 1990s. It has other kinds of relevance, and I find it very disrespectful. But more than that, March 3rd, 2022, I was renewing research I had done prior to 2020. As a matter of fact, early 2019, regarding Paul Warburg's writing on the Federal Reserve. My understanding is that anniversaries were coming up on that, and this year is actually the anniversary on many of the major matters about which Paul Warburg wrote in his 2-volume history of the Federal Reserve of the United States, which isn't just about the Federal Reserve. So on March 3rd, I was doing this